Greetings, my friends and fellow brigaders and fellow MERP enthusiasts and so on and so forth, and the occasional odd individual who stumbles across this and scratches his or her head going, what the heck is this? This is my continuing revisitation or homage to Iron Crown Enterprises MERP, or Middle Earth role-playing game system, created back in the 80s and continued into the early to mid-90s. And then whatever happened. Anyway, this particular book is also a continuation of the subsystem in a series inside MERP, Fortresses of Middle Earth. Now, we talk. They mention it numerous times in the book, several times in the book, and a couple times in the movie. And there's even a scene where Pippin, under the urging of Gandalf, climbs up to the top of one of the towers in Minas Tirith to light the beacon to summon the Riders of Rohan. You know what they don't tell you, and I'm sure most of you know this because you've all probably read the books. For those of you who have not read the novels, what they don't mention in the movies is that there's a chain of these beacons, and you see them light up in the movie. You see the 7 of them, one after another, lighting up, and then eventually Aragorn, who's out there, just happens to be loitering out there, spots it time to run in to roust out the Rohirrim. What they don't tell you is that there's a series of these towers that run to the south as well, and they don't show that in the movie. They don't show the mustering of the northern armies of Gondor, which respond late in the day. Most of them did not come because of the beacons. They had already been on their way to the capital, as it were, even though Denthor hadn't formally demanded that they do so. We also don't see is the might of Gondor in its full swing, and even in this diminished time, the Gondor could field a pretty significant, potent military arm. They have the army, the militia, the ground force to put, give a serious challenge to Mordor if Denthor had done his homework and properly prepared his country, even though we know because of his lack of the fact that he kept looking into the stones, if you will, and getting bad information fed to him by Sauron, that he chose not to do so. In the books, some 14,000 men respond in various groups, some in few hundreds and some in by the thousand, but they have a nice chunk of people there. What we don't see is the massive garrisons at Perliger and Dol Amroth, as well as several other key locations in the south. These were tied up by the Corsairs and a number of other threats that could have affected Gondor, so you can't leave everything undefended. Although I would argue that in this particular last-ditch thing, anytime the Sauron sends a massive army and you know it's coming, this is not a time to hold back your troops. It's a time to mass them to confront the major threat. It's an all or nothing moment, which we try to avoid real hard if you think about it. The art of Sun Tzu says, the art of war, don't do that. Don't concentrate where your enemy's strongest. Concentrate where they're the weakest. Anyway, so the Fortresses of Middle Earth is this series of where they focus on particular fortifications or locations. And this, I'm assuming, because as fortifications go, Calenhad, a beacon of Gondor, is a minor fort. It's not even considered a fortress, not really. At best, its garrison was probably a few dozen people, maybe a couple score at the height of Gondor's power. In the days of the Lord of the Ring, if they were lucky, there were a dozen people there, and mostly to keep the beacon prepared to be lit. In the movies, you see a few of these places, and most of them look like remote outposts or just a pile of brush on top of the hill with a caretaker shack. And that's true. That's what a lot of them were. They depended on the remote location. That was their most heavy, the most potent defense was just that it wasn't worth going up there after. Now, an enemy, on the other hand, Sauron and his lieutenants were quite confident in their ability to crush Gondor. They didn't bother. But a savvy warlord or savvy enemy ruler might have sent a strike team to knock out one or two of these things to prevent that warning from getting out. Having at a set time and place to raid one or two of these beacons and knock them out. And like I said, they didn't talk about the 7 or so beacons that ran to the south. That would have summoned the armies from Pelegar and from the central provinces of Gondor, and preferably in enough time for them to march north to meet the enemy. So they weren't late. In this case, the book goes on. It's actually decent. Like I said, and I say this now, it's a decent layout. You've got your basic stuff for a module, and like in a number of them, they open up with this, they call it Tale of Years. It breaks down the history of Middle Earth, and how it pertains to Gondor, and particularly maybe the book you're dealing with. Then we got a brief history of the beacons of Gondor, land surrounding it, a small town that's nearby that actually supports the garrison. I like these, like I said, I say that all the time. I like these things because I can borrow them and use them for other stuff. There's a nice layout of a manor house. I've used this in particular one a number of times for a number of different purposes. The history of Calenhad, the town, the beacon itself, and then we get into the fortress layout, and they go into some real decent detail on that sort of stuff. Your typical blueprint stuff for the locations and the map, the towers, and the guardhouse and gatehouse and so on. And that fills up a big chunk of the artwork. And we have a recent entry in talking about inspiring artwork. Okay, some are more inspiring than others. This is older school artwork, but still, I like that sort of stuff because it really gives you a taste of what this place might have been like in its heyday, right? Just saying. The stables, the beacon tower itself. This is actually an elaborate beacon tower compared to the majority of them. This is a crucial key one. So here's a signal. Here's one more. This is the remnant of what we actually seen in the movies, and most of these have been worn down from age and time and look more like rubble piles or rock piles than the towers. And we never get a picture of the ones to the south, which, truth is, probably look more like this stuff and less like those rough and frontier looking things that we've seen in the movie that went to the Rohan, because the south is they were developed first and had more money and time and effort put into them. So short and sweet, a good addition for the base material in it. Adventuring wise, there's a couple adventures in here, and although, unless you're a member of the garrison, the only reason you'd probably have anything to do with this sort of thing is if you happen to pass by one in the neighborhood, or you're running for your lives, and this is the closest government defense place you can get to. The odds are, though, you're not going up into these hills looking for. I guess it's a matter of taste for adventure. Most of your venturing is going to take place much farther away from Gondor than this, but it's good to know this stuff. It's good to see it, and it gives you a much more, and yet another little key, another little piece to a bigger puzzle. So, like I said, Calenhad, and I'm sorry, I can never pronounce these words. I do my best, unless I create it myself, and then even then I can't pronounce it. My friends will tell you that. Say, what is this? And I'm thinking, where did you come up with the name? Well, I looked over here and I'm looking at this, thank you for visiting customer only parking sign. And I go, C-U-P-A-O-N. Coupon. Coupon? Yeah, that's the name of the guy. Coupon, right? See? On the spur of the moment, take the first two letters of the three words that are in the big red lettering and go, coupon. Customer parking only. That's what it translates into. You know, we don't tell them that, but hey, it is what it is, right? So, thank you for visiting, and I hope you enjoy the series. And if you do, don't forget to tell your friends, your family, your dog, flag it, like it, don't like it. You know, I understand you get as many don't likes, you get a lot of attention too. You know, I don't know. I do this mostly for my friend, for my own. I don't know. I want to call it pleasure. I'm doing it because I like the stuff. I like to share it, and it gives me something to do different, right? And sometimes I find myself in this roving little office of mine with these weird old gaps of time, and I don't have much to do. And right now, my internet hotspot is tapped for the month, so I can't be on there blogging and doing the other stuff I usually do, not unless I want to creep along. And I hear everybody says, you know what, you can go down to McDonald's and you go, oh. And here I am in McDonald's in their parking lot, and I can't log into it. So, unless I'm supposed to be camped out inside the McDonald's, then, maybe. But then I can't be really doing these things inside the store because people already stare at me funny as they sit there wondering what this big ugly grease truck sitting there with this guy who's talking to himself. Yeah. That's what my wife thinks whenever she says, you're talking to yourself. You're just talking to the computer again. Who are you talking to? Who's in there? Yeah, what do you do? All right. Yeah, enough for my crazy rant for the morning. Next day, next thing, next stage. On.